Story of Rome, a saga etched into the very bedrock of Western civilization, begins not with legions or emperors, but with whispers of wolves and the gentle lapping of a river against its banks. Around the 8th century BCE, in the fertile Latium plains of central Italy, where 7 modest hills rose from the marshy lowlands, a legend took root, shaping the destiny of a people. It was here, in a landscape cradled by the Tiber, that the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, are said to have been abandoned, only to be suckled by a she-wolf, a symbol of fierce nurturing that would forever bind itself to the Roman identity. This foundational myth, while perhaps embellished by centuries of retelling, speaks to a deep connection with the wild, untamed spirit of the land, and to the idea of a nascent community forged in hardship and divine favor. Before the grandeur of marble temples and vast amphitheaters, Rome was a collection of humble huts, a patchwork of pastoral settlements perched atop the Palatine, Capitoline, and Quirinal hills. The earliest inhabitants, Latin tribes, lived a life dictated by the rhythms of agriculture and the constant vigilance against rival communities. Their existence was simple, marked by the turning of seasons, the tending of flocks, and the forging of rudimentary tools. The air would have carried the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the distant bleating of sheep. The sounds would have been the rustle of leaves, the murmur of the Tiber, and the occasional shouts of children at play, or the more urgent cries of men defending their borders. The transition from these scattered villages to a unified city-state was gradual, a process shrouded in the mists of early history. While the precise details remain elusive, archaeological evidence suggests a slow amalgamation of these hilltop settlements, perhaps driven by shared defense needs or the strategic advantage of controlling the Tiber's ford, a vital crossing point for trade routes. The story of Romulus, credited with founding the city and establishing its initial laws and institutions, reflects this early consolidation. He is said to have marked the sacred boundary, the pomerium, with a plow, a ritual act that symbolically separated the ordered space of the city from the wildness beyond. This act, whether literal or symbolic, underscores the Roman emphasis on order, law, and defined boundaries, principles that would become cornerstones of their vast empire. The early Roman monarchy, following Romulus, is traditionally said to have comprised 7 kings, a period stretching from the mid-8th century BCE to the late 6th century BCE. These monarchs, a mix of Latin and Etruscan rulers, presided over a burgeoning community. The Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization to the north, exerted a significant influence on early Rome, bringing with them advanced engineering techniques such as drainage systems and monumental architecture, and cultural practices, including divination and gladiatorial games. Under their rule, Rome began to shed its rustic origins. The Forum, initially a marshy valley, was drained and transformed into a public space, a marketplace, and a gathering point for political and religious life. Temples were erected, and the city's defenses were strengthened. However, the rule of these kings was not without its tensions. The Roman people, particularly the aristocratic families known as the patricians, grew increasingly resentful of absolute power. The story of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the 7th and last king, paints a picture of tyranny and abuse. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, is infamous for the rape of Lucretia, a virtuous Roman noblewoman. This act, a profound violation of honor and justice in Roman society, served as the catalyst for a popular uprising. Lucretia's tragic suicide, after recounting her ordeal, ignited the flames of rebellion. This event, dated by tradition to 509 BCE, marks a pivotal moment, the expulsion of the kings and the birth of the Roman Republic. The establishment of the Republic was a revolutionary act, a deliberate rejection of monarchy and an embrace of shared governance. The Romans, scarred by the abuses of the Tarquins, were determined to prevent any single individual from accumulating too much power. They devised a complex system of checks and balances, a testament to their nascent political genius. At the heart of the Republic were two annually elected magistrates, the consuls, who held supreme executive and military authority. Their power was deliberately limited by their short term in office and the ability of the other consul to veto their decisions. This dual leadership was a clever mechanism to prevent the rise of another king. Beneath the consuls, a hierarchy of other magistrates was established: praetors, who administered justice; aediles, who oversaw public works and games; and quaestors, who managed the state treasury. The true power, however, resided in the Senate, an advisory body composed of elder statesmen, primarily patricians. Though technically an advisory body, the Senate's authority grew immensely over time, guiding policy, controlling finances, and shaping the destiny of the Republic. Its members, chosen for life, represented the accumulated wisdom and experience of Rome's elite families. The early Republic was a period of intense internal struggle, primarily between the patricians and the plebeians, the common people. The patricians, descendants of the original aristocratic families, held a near monopoly on political power, religious offices, and legal knowledge. The plebeians, who formed the vast majority of the population, were excluded from holding public office, marrying patricians, and even from knowing the laws, which were unwritten and interpreted solely by patrician priests. This disparity led to frequent social unrest and secessionist movements, where plebeians would collectively withdraw from the city, refusing to work or fight, effectively crippling Rome. One of the most significant achievements of the early Republic was the gradual expansion of plebeian rights. Through persistent struggle, including the secession of the plebs to the Sacred Mount, the plebeians forced the patricians to concede. A crucial victory came in 494 BCE with the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs. These tribunes, sacrosanct and inviolable, possessed the power to veto any act of a magistrate or the Senate that was deemed harmful to the plebeians. This office became a powerful voice for the common people, a direct challenge to patrician dominance. Another monumental step towards equality was the codification of Roman law. Until the mid-5th century BCE, laws were unwritten, making them subject to arbitrary interpretation by patrician magistrates. The plebeians demanded transparency and fairness. This led to the creation of the 12 Tables around 450 BCE, a groundbreaking legal code inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed publicly in the Forum. These laws, though sometimes harsh by modern standards, provided a written framework for justice, ensuring that all citizens, regardless of social standing, could know their rights and obligations. This was a profound shift, laying the foundation for Roman jurisprudence, a system of law that would influence legal systems across the globe for millennia. Despite these internal struggles, the early Republic was also a period of relentless expansion. Rome was not yet an empire, but a city-state constantly engaged in warfare with its neighbors. The Latin League, a confederation of nearby Latin cities, was a frequent adversary, as were the Volsci, the Aequi, and the Etruscans. These early conflicts were often brutal, fought for control of fertile land, trade routes, and strategic positions. Roman military tactics, though still evolving, emphasized discipline, organization, and a willingness to adapt. The citizen soldier, defending his homeland and his family's honor. Ra was the backbone of these early legions. The sack of Rome by the Gauls in 390 BCE or 387 BCE, historians still debate the precise year, was a devastating blow, a moment of profound humiliation that etched itself deeply into the Roman psyche. A Gallic chieftain named Brennus led his warriors south, defeating a Roman army at the Battle of the Allia and then marching on the city. Rome was largely undefended, its citizens having fled in panic. The Gauls plundered and burned the city, leaving much of it in ruins. The story of the geese on the Capitoline, whose honking alerted the defenders to a sneak attack, became a legendary tale of Roman resilience. Though Rome paid a heavy ransom to induce the Gauls to leave, the experience instilled a deep-seated fear of foreign invasion and a fierce determination to never again suffer such a defeat. This event spurred a massive rebuilding effort and a renewed focus on military strength and defensive fortifications. The aftermath of the Gallic sack saw Rome emerge stronger and more unified. The city rebuilt itself with a renewed sense of purpose. The Latin League was eventually dissolved, and Rome began to assert its dominance over its neighbors, not through outright conquest in many cases, but through a system of alliances and treaties that gradually brought the Italian peninsula under its sway. This process, known as the Romanization of Italy, involved integrating conquered peoples into the Roman system, often granting them varying degrees of citizenship or allied status. This pragmatic approach, offering benefits alongside subjugation, was a key factor in Rome's long-term success. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome had consolidated its control over Latium and was beginning to look southward, towards the wealthy Greek city-states of Magna Graecia in southern Italy. These cities, with their rich cultural heritage and advanced economies, presented both a tempting prize and a formidable challenge. The stage was set for the next phase of Rome's expansion, a period that would see the Republic transform from a regional power into a dominant force in the Mediterranean world. The seeds sown in myth and early struggle had taken root, and the young Republic, forged in the crucible of internal conflict and external warfare, was ready to embark on its extraordinary journey towards empire. If you're enjoying this, liking and subscribing truly helps and is much appreciated. The echoes of the Samnite Wars, though fading, left an indelible mark on Rome. With the Apennine Mountains now firmly under their sway, the legions, forged in the crucible of these brutal campaigns, looked outward. Across the narrow Strait of Messina, the fertile island of Sicily beckoned, a land of sun-drenched vineyards and strategic ports. But Sicily was not empty. It was a vibrant tapestry of Greek city-states, heirs to the Hellenic world, and, more significantly, a powerful Carthaginian presence. Carthage, a formidable maritime power with roots in Phoenicia, held sway over the western Mediterranean, its ships laden with goods from distant lands, its coffers overflowing with wealth. For generations, Rome and Carthage had maintained a wary peace, their spheres of influence largely separate, but the allure of Sicily, a natural bridge between their burgeoning empires, proved too great, the spark that ignited the First Punic War. Around 264 BCE was seemingly small, a mercenary dispute in Messana, a city on Sicily's northeastern tip. A group of Campanian mercenaries, known as the Mamertines, had seized Messana, and when threatened by Syracuse, a powerful Greek city-state on the island, they appealed to both Rome and Carthage for aid. Carthage, ever pragmatic, was swift to respond, establishing a garrison in Messana. But Rome, perhaps sensing an opportunity to extend its influence beyond the Italian peninsula, also sent forces. The clash was inevitable. What began as a localized conflict quickly escalated into a struggle for regional supremacy. Rome, a land power, found itself at a distinct disadvantage against Carthage's formidable navy. Carthaginian ships, swift and expertly handled, dominated the seas, disrupting Roman supply lines and threatening its coastal towns. The Romans, however, were nothing if not adaptable. Legend, perhaps embellished by later historians, tells of a captured Carthaginian quinquereme, a large warship which served as a blueprint for the Roman fleet. With characteristic ingenuity, they rapidly built hundreds of these vessels, transforming their agrarian society into a naval power almost overnight. They also innovated, developing the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge with a spike that could be dropped onto enemy ships, effectively turning sea battles into land battles, where the superior Roman legionary could excel. This ingenious device, though sometimes unstable in rough seas, neutralized Carthage's naval advantage. The war dragged on for over 2 decades, a grueling test of endurance. Battles raged across Sicily, on the seas, and even in North Africa, when the Roman general Regulus launched an ill-fated invasion of Carthage itself. The human cost was immense, with both sides suffering staggering losses. Yet Rome's relentless determination, its seemingly endless supply of manpower, and its ability to learn and adapt ultimately prevailed. In 241 BCE, at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, the Roman fleet decisively defeated the Carthaginian navy, forcing Carthage to sue for peace. The terms were harsh. Carthage surrendered Sicily, paid a massive indemnity, and promised not to interfere with Rome's allies. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province, a rich granary that would feed its growing population. The peace, however, was merely a respite. Carthage, though humbled, harbored a deep resentment. A new generation of Carthaginian leaders, most notably Hamilcar Barca and his brilliant son, Hannibal, began to rebuild their strength, focusing their ambitions on Hispania, modern-day Spain. This region, rich in silver mines and manpower, became Carthage's new power base. Hannibal, from a young age, was said to have sworn eternal enmity to Rome. His audacious plan, conceived in the mountains of Hispania, would shock the Roman world. In 218 BCE, Hannibal, with an army of tens of thousands of soldiers, war elephants, and cavalry, embarked on one of history's most daring military campaigns. He marched his forces across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and most astonishingly, over the snow-capped Alps, a feat of logistical genius and sheer willpower. Many of his men and most of his elephants perished in the treacherous mountain passes, but the core of his army, hardened and resolute, descended into the plains of Italy, a specter of dread for the Romans. The Second Punic War, often simply called the Hannibalic War, was a brutal, existential struggle for Rome. Hannibal, a tactical genius, inflicted a series of devastating defeats on the Roman legions. At the Battle of the Trebia River, he lured the Romans into a trap, ambushing them from hidden ravines. At Lake Trasimene, he caught a Roman army marching along the lake shore, annihilating them in a fog-shrouded ambush. But his most crushing victory came at Cannae in 216 BCE, a battle that remains a masterclass in military strategy. Here, Hannibal, with a smaller force, encircled and utterly destroyed 2 consular Roman armies, perhaps 50,000 to 70,000 Romans killed or captured in a single day. The sheer scale of the defeat sent shockwaves through the Republic. Historians still debate the precise numbers of Roman casualties at Cannae, with ancient sources varying wildly, but the consensus is that it was one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman military history. Despite these devastating losses, Rome refused to surrender. Under the leadership of figures like Quintus Fabius Maximus, known as Cunctator or the Delayer, Rome adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal's superior forces and instead harassing his supply lines and wearing down his army. This patient, often unpopular strategy slowly began to turn the tide. Meanwhile, Roman generals like Scipio Africanus, a brilliant young commander, took the fight to Carthage's allies in Hispania, eventually conquering the Carthaginian strongholds there. The climax came when Scipio, having secured Hispania, proposed a daring plan: invade North Africa, striking at Carthage itself. The Roman Senate, initially hesitant, eventually agreed. Scipio landed in Africa, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy to defend his homeland. The final confrontation occurred at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. Here, Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics, brilliantly outmaneuvered the Carthaginian forces, inflicting a decisive defeat. Hannibal, for the first time, was truly beaten. Carthage was forced to accept even harsher terms. They lost all their overseas territories, paid another enormous indemnity, and were forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. The Second Punic War solidified Rome's position as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. But the taste of victory did not sate Rome's ambition. The legions, now seasoned and confident, looked eastward. The Hellenistic kingdoms, remnants of Alexander the Great's vast empire, were rich and culturally sophisticated, but also fragmented and prone to internal strife. Rome, often under the guise of protecting its allies or responding to perceived threats, began to intervene in the affairs of these kingdoms. The Macedonian Wars, fought against the Antigonid kings of Macedon, saw Rome dismantle a power that had once dominated Greece. Philip V and his successor Perseus, both formidable rulers, were ultimately no match for the disciplined Roman legions. At the Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE, the Roman general Lucius Aemilius Paulus delivered a crushing defeat to Perseus, effectively ending Macedonian independence. The Seleucid Empire, stretching across Asia Minor and the Near East, was another target. Antiochus III, the Great, attempted to expand his influence into Greece, bringing him into direct conflict with Rome. At the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE, Scipio Asiaticus, the brother of Scipio Africanus, led the Roman forces to a decisive victory, forcing Antiochus to relinquish his territories in Asia Minor and pay a massive war indemnity. The Roman presence in the East was now undeniable. The final act of Carthaginian destruction, though perhaps unnecessary from a strategic standpoint, speaks to the enduring fear and resentment Rome harbored. Cato the Elder, a prominent Roman senator, famously ended every speech, regardless of its topic, with the chilling phrase, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. Despite Carthage's diminished state, its very existence seemed to be an affront to Roman dominance. In 149 BCE, Rome launched the Third Punic War. This was less a war and more a siege. After a 3-year struggle, the city of Carthage was finally captured in 146 BCE. Its inhabitants were slaughtered or enslaved, and the city itself was utterly razed. Legend claims the Romans sowed salt into the fields to prevent anything from ever growing there again. Though archaeological evidence for this practice is scarce, this act, though brutal, symbolized Rome's absolute supremacy. In the same year, Rome also finally crushed the last vestiges of Greek independence, destroying the city of Corinth and incorporating Greece into its growing empire. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome was no longer merely a city-state or a regional power. It was the undisputed hegemon of the Mediterranean world. Its legions had marched from the Atlantic to the Aegean. Its ships sailed unchallenged across the Mare Nostrum, our sea. Vast new provinces, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Hispania, Macedonia, Africa, and parts of Asia Minor, poured wealth into Rome. Grain from Sicily and Africa, silver from Hispania, slaves from conquered lands, and exotic goods from the East flowed into the Republic. This immense expansion brought unprecedented wealth and power, but it also sowed the seeds of profound internal change and ultimately strife. The traditional Roman social and economic structures, largely based on small-scale farming and citizen soldiers, began to buckle under the weight of empire. The long military campaigns meant that citizen farmers were away from their lands for extended periods. Their farms, neglected or poorly managed, often fell into disrepair or were bought up by wealthy senators and equestrians, who amassed vast estates worked by slaves. This led to a growing disparity between the rich and the poor. A burgeoning class of landless, unemployed citizens swelled the population of Rome, creating a volatile urban proletariat. These men, no longer tied to the land, sought livelihoods in the city, often relying on patronage and handouts. The influx of immense wealth also led to rampant corruption. Provincial governors, often motivated by personal gain, exploited their positions, enriching themselves at the expense of the conquered peoples. The system of tax collection, often outsourced to private contractors known as publicani, was ripe for abuse, leading to further resentment in the provinces. The Senate, once a bastion of civic virtue, became increasingly dominated by a wealthy elite, more concerned with their own power and prestige than with the welfare of the Republic as a whole. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, emerged as figures who tried to address these mounting social and economic problems. Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BCE, proposed radical land reforms aimed at redistributing public land to the landless poor. His intentions were noble, seeking to restore the traditional Roman ideal of the independent farmer-soldier and to reduce the growing social inequality. However, his methods challenged established political norms. He bypassed the Senate, taking his proposals directly to the plebeian assembly, and even attempted to remove a fellow tribune who vetoed his legislation. This unprecedented challenge to senatorial authority sparked fierce opposition. In a violent confrontation, Tiberius and many of his followers were murdered by a mob of senators and their supporters, an unthinkable act of political violence in the Republic. A decade later, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, also became tribune of the plebs. Gaius pursued an even more ambitious reform agenda, including not only land redistribution, but also subsidized grain for the urban poor, judicial reforms, and even proposals to extend Roman citizenship to Italian allies. He was a more astute politician than his brother, building a broader coalition of support. Yet, like Tiberius, his reforms threatened the power and privilege of the senatorial elite. The opposition coalesced, and in 121 BCE, Gaius too met a violent end. The Senate, for the first time, passed a senatus consultum ultimum, a final decree of the Senate, effectively declaring him an enemy of the state and authorizing his execution. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers marked a turning point. They demonstrated that political disputes in Rome could now be settled not just through debate and law, but through violence. The Republic, though outwardly triumphant, was beginning to fray from within, its foundations weakened by the very success of its expansion. The relentless campaigns had solidified Rome's dominance, but the internal strife they unleashed would prove to be a far more insidious enemy. The sun, which had for centuries warmed the robust foundations of the Roman Republic, began to cast longer, more unsettling shadows. The very land that had nourished Rome's early strength now bore witness to the profound shifts within its society. As the 2nd century BCE drew to a close, the vast territories acquired through conquest, the immense wealth flowing into the capital, and the sheer scale of the empire began to strain the old republican institutions. The traditional ideal of the citizen soldier, ever ready to return to his small farm after campaigning, was fading. Wars were longer, fought further afield, and the land itself, often left untended, fell into the hands of a burgeoning aristocracy. This growing chasm between the wealthy elite and the struggling commoners was perhaps nowhere more acutely felt than in the lives of the Gracchi brothers. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, scions of a noble family, yet deeply empathetic to the plight of the plebeians, emerged as tribunes of the people in the late 130s and 120s BCE, respectively. Tiberius, elected tribune in 133 BCE, looked out upon a Rome where vast tracts of public land, acquired through conquest, had been illegally enclosed by the wealthy. He proposed a radical land reform, aiming to redistribute this land to the landless poor, thereby restoring their economic independence and, crucially, their eligibility for military service. His intentions, though rooted in a desire to strengthen the republic, were perceived by many senators as a direct assault on their property rights and traditional authority. The debates were fierce, echoing through the forum, and the air crackled with tension. Tiberius, in an unprecedented move, bypassed the Senate and took his proposals directly to the popular assembly. This defiance of senatorial custom, combined with his attempt to run for re-election, a move considered by some to be unconstitutional, led to his tragic end. He and many of his followers were clubbed to death by senators and their partisans on the Capitoline Hill, their bodies cast into the Tiber. It was a shocking, bloody precedent, a stark signal that political disagreements were no longer confined to the realm of rhetoric and law. A decade later, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, took up the mantle. Elected tribune in 123 BCE, Gaius pursued an even more ambitious agenda, extending beyond land reform to include subsidized grain for the urban poor, judicial reforms, and even proposals for Roman citizenship for allied Italian communities. He understood that the problems of Rome were interconnected, a tangled knot of economic disparity, political disenfranchisement, and social unrest. His reforms, though popular with the masses, further alienated the Senate. Unlike his brother, Gaius was a more seasoned politician, building broad coalitions, yet the underlying tensions remained. When his term ended and his political enemies sought to undo his reforms, violence erupted again. In 121 BCE, the Senate passed a Senatus Consultum Ultimum, an emergency decree effectively declaring Gaius an enemy of the state. He fled, but rather than be captured, he chose to end his own life, or was killed by a loyal slave, on the Aventine Hill. The Gracchi brothers, though ultimately unsuccessful in their immediate aims, had irrevocably altered the course of Roman politics. They had shown that the popular assembly could be a powerful tool against senatorial dominance, and tragically, that political dissent could now be met with lethal force. The Republic, once a beacon of ordered liberty, now carried the faint, unsettling scent of civil strife. The seeds of change sown by the Gracchi blossomed into a period of profound military and political transformation, personified by figures like Gaius Marius. Marius, a new man from outside the traditional Roman aristocracy, rose through the ranks of the military, proving his exceptional prowess in campaigns in North Africa against Jugurtha and Law, terror against Germanic tribes like the Cimbri and Teutones in the late 2nd century BCE. His greatest innovation, however, was not on the battlefield, but in the recruitment office. Facing a shortage of eligible soldiers due to the decline of the small landowning farmer, Marius began to recruit landless citizens, promising them pay, equipment, and crucially, a share of the spoils and land upon retirement. This Marius reforms, enacted around 107 BCE, fundamentally transformed the Roman army. Soldiers no longer fought primarily for the Republic, but for their general, who was responsible for their welfare and future. This professionalization of the army, while making it incredibly effective, inadvertently created a powerful new political force, legions loyal to their commanders rather than to the state. This shift became starkly evident in the rivalry between Marius and his former lieutenant, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla, an aristocratic patrician, distinguished himself in the Social War, 91 to 88 BCE, a brutal conflict where Rome's Italian allies fought for full Roman citizenship. The war, a bloody testament to Rome's internal divisions, ultimately saw citizenship extended to most of Italy, but at a tremendous cost in lives. Following the Social War, a lucrative command against Mithridates VI of Pontus in the east became the prize in a bitter power struggle between Marius and Sulla. In 88 BCE, Sulla, having been legally granted the command, marched his legions on Rome itself when Marius and his allies attempted to seize it from him. This was an unprecedented act, a direct assault on the sacred city by a Roman general. Sulla took Rome, secured his command, and departed for the east. But the story did not end there. While Sulla was away, Marius and his supporters regained control of Rome, unleashing a brutal purge of Sulla's allies. The cycle of violence escalated. When Sulla returned victorious from the east in 82 BCE, he marched on Rome again, this time with a hardened, loyal army. What followed was a reign of terror unlike anything Rome had seen. Sulla instituted proscriptions, lists of enemies of the state whose property was confiscated and whose lives were forfeit. Thousands, including many senators and equestrians, were murdered. The streets of Rome ran red, and the very concept of legal process seemed to dissolve in the face of raw power. Sulla then declared himself dictator, not for a limited emergency, but dictator re publicae constituende causa, dictator for the purpose of restoring the republic. He enacted a series of constitutional reforms aimed at strengthening the Senate and weakening the tribunes and popular assemblies, attempting to turn back the clock to an idealized, more stable republican past. Yet, paradoxically, his actions, the proscriptions, the marches on Rome, the seizure of absolute power, had inflicted irreparable damage on the very institutions he claimed to be preserving. He voluntarily retired from politics in 79 BCE, a unique act of self-restraint after wielding such immense power, but the precedent of military might dictating political outcomes had been set. The Republic was teetering, its foundations eroded by ambition, violence, and the unwavering loyalty of professional armies to their commanders. The vacuum left by Sulla's retirement was quickly filled by a new generation of ambitious generals and politicians, men who had learned the lessons of Marius and Sulla all too well. Among them, three figures stood out, their destinies intertwined in a complex dance of alliance and rivalry. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Gaius Julius Caesar. Pompey, a brilliant general, had earned his formidable reputation, fighting for Sulla and later clearing the Mediterranean of pirates and conquering vast territories in the east. Crassus, immensely wealthy, had crushed the slave revolt led by Spartacus in 71 BCE. Caesar, a young, ambitious patrician with immense charisma and a keen political mind, was just beginning his ascent. These three men, despite their personal animosities and differing ambitions, recognized the need for a pragmatic alliance to overcome the entrenched opposition of the Senate. In 60 BCE, they formed the First Triumvirate, a private political agreement that effectively bypassed the Republic's traditional mechanisms. They agreed to support each other's political agendas, pooling their vast influence and resources. Pompey secured land for his veterans and ratification of his eastern settlements. Crassus gained financial concessions for his business allies. Caesar, in turn, secured the consulship for 59 BCE and, crucially, a lengthy command in Gaul. This triumvirate, though informal, was a clear demonstration that power now resided less in the Senate and more in the hands of a few dominant individuals backed by popular support and, implicitly, military might. Caesar's command in Gaul proved to be his crucible. For nearly a decade, from 58 to 50 BCE, he systematically conquered the vast territories of Gaul, extending Roman dominion to the Atlantic and the English Channel. His campaigns were brutal, efficient, and meticulously documented in his Commentarii de Bello Gallico. He demonstrated exceptional military genius, engineering feats like the bridge over the Rhine, and displaying a deep understanding of logistics and strategy. The Gallic Wars provided him with immense wealth, a battle-hardened and fiercely loyal army, and unparalleled prestige among the Roman populace. While he was conquering Gaul, however, the triumvirate began to fray. Crassus met his end in Parthia in 53 BCE, a disastrous military campaign that removed one of the pillars of the alliance. Pompey, increasingly wary of Caesar's growing power and popularity, began to align himself more closely with the Senate, seeing Caesar as a potential threat to his own preeminence. The stage was set for the final cataclysmic showdown. As Caesar's command in Gaul neared its end, the Senate, urged on by Pompey, demanded that he disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen, effectively stripping him of his immunity and leaving him vulnerable to prosecution by his political enemies. Caesar, knowing that to comply was political suicide, faced an agonizing choice. On January 10, 49 BCE, he led his 13th legion across the Rubicon River, a small stream that marked the boundary between Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. His famous words, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, signified an irrevocable break with the Republic. This act of crossing the Rubicon was an open declaration of civil war against Pompey and the Senate. The civil war that followed was a global conflict, fought across Italy, Greece, Africa, and Spain. Pompey, initially holding the advantage in terms of resources and senatorial legitimacy, underestimated Caesar's speed and the unwavering loyalty of his legions. Caesar's lightning campaign through Italy forced Pompey to abandon Rome and retreat to Greece. The decisive battle came at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, where Caesar's disciplined veterans decisively defeated Pompey's larger but less cohesive army. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was tragically assassinated upon landing, a brutal end to a once illustrious career. With Pompey gone, Caesar pursued his enemies across the Mediterranean, consolidating his power. He became the undisputed master of the Roman world. Upon his return to Rome, he embarked on a dizzying array of reforms, demonstrating his vision for a new Rome. He reformed the calendar, introduced new laws, undertook massive public works projects, and extended Roman citizenship to various provincial communities. He was granted unprecedented powers by the Senate, including the dictatorship for life in 44 BCE. He seemed to embody the future of Rome, a strong, centralized leader capable of bringing order out of chaos. However, many senators, deeply committed to the republican ideal, viewed Caesar's accumulation of power as an existential threat to Rome's ancient liberties. They feared he intended to become king, anathema to the Roman psyche since the expulsion of the Tarquins centuries before. A conspiracy formed, involving prominent senators like Brutus and Cassius, who believed they were acting to save the Republic. On the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated in the theater of Pompey, stabbed multiple times by the conspirators. The hope was that his death would restore the Republic, but the conspirators had gravely miscalculated. Caesar's assassination plunged Rome back into another round of civil wars, even more brutal and widespread than the last. The Roman populace, many of whom adored Caesar, were outraged. The legions, loyal to their fallen commander, thirsted for vengeance. The immediate aftermath saw the rise of new contenders for power: Caesar's adopted son and heir, Octavian, his powerful general, Mark Antony, and another general, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. These three formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE, a formal, legally sanctioned agreement to rule Rome and avenge Caesar's death. They unleashed a new wave of proscriptions, even more extensive than Sulla's, eliminating thousands of their political enemies, including the orator Cicero, who had dared to speak out against Antony. The triumvirates then turned their attention to the conspirators. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE in Macedonia, Octavian and Antony decisively defeated the forces of Brutus and Cassius, who both committed suicide. With their enemies vanquished, the triumvirates divided the Roman world among themselves. Octavian took the west, Antony the east, and Lepidus, the weakest of the three, was soon marginalized. The uneasy alliance between Octavian and Antony, however, was destined to collapse. Antony, based in Egypt, became deeply entangled with Cleopatra VII, the powerful queen of Egypt, and his increasingly orientalized lifestyle and political decisions alienated many in Rome, particularly Octavian. The final confrontation came in 31 BCE at the naval battle of Actium, off the coast of Greece. Octavian's forces, led by his brilliant general Agrippa, decisively defeated the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they both committed suicide the following year. With their deaths, Octavian stood alone as the undisputed master of the Roman world. The long, bloody century of civil wars had finally ended. Octavian, a shrewd and pragmatic politician, understood that the Roman people were weary of conflict and yearned for stability. He also understood that openly declaring himself king would be political suicide, as it had been for Caesar. Instead, he embarked on a masterful campaign of political rebranding. In 27 BCE, he formally restored the Republic, returning his powers to the Senate and the people of Rome. In reality, he retained ultimate control, subtly consolidating power under new titles. The Senate, grateful for the return of peace, bestowed upon him the title of Augustus, meaning revered one, a name that carried religious and moral authority without implying kingship. He became princeps, the first citizen, rather than king or dictator. He controlled the legions, the treasury, and foreign policy, while maintaining the appearance of republican institutions. This delicate balance, this carefully constructed illusion of a restored republic, marked the true beginning of the Roman Empire. The Republic, battered and broken by ambition and civil strife, had given way to a new form of governance, one where a single, powerful individual held sway. ushering in an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. The sun, which had once cast unsettling shadows, now shone with a new, albeit different, kind of light upon the vast Roman world. The dust of Philippi settled, and with it the last vestiges of the old republic, though few could have known it then. Octavian, still a young man, though hardened by war and political maneuvering, stood poised at a precipice. His rivals, Brutus and Cassius, were gone, but the triumvirate itself, forged in necessity, was an unstable alliance. Mark Antony, charismatic and powerful, held sway in the east, his affections increasingly entangled with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. Lepidus, the third triumvir, had been skillfully neutralized, stripped of his true power, and relegated to a ceremonial role, a political ghost haunting the edges of Roman influence. This left Octavian and Antony, two titans, each believing themselves the rightful heir to Caesar's legacy, each with legions loyal to their command. The uneasy peace held for a decade, a fragile truce punctuated by diplomatic dance and underlying tension. Antony, immersed in the opulent world of Alexandria, began to adopt Eastern customs, his Roman identity seemingly blurring. He bestowed Roman territories upon Cleopatra and her children, acts that Octavian, ever the shrewd politician, masterfully spun as betrayals of Roman tradition and a threat to its very sovereignty. The Roman people, weary of civil war, were subtly guided to see Antony not as a fellow Roman, but as an exotic, dangerous figure, seduced by foreign allure. The stage was set for the final, decisive confrontation, not merely for power, but for the soul of Rome itself. In 31 BCE, the fleets of Octavian and Antony met off the coast of Actium, a naval battle that would decide the fate of the Roman world. The clash was immense, a swirling chaos of oars, sails, and grappling hooks, the air thick with the cries of men and the thud of timbers. Antony and Cleopatra, commanding a larger, perhaps more unwieldy, fleet, found themselves outmaneuvered by Octavian's general Agrippa, a brilliant naval tactician. In a moment that has puzzled historians for millennia, Cleopatra, with her Egyptian squadron, abruptly broke formation and sailed away, followed shortly thereafter by Antony. Was it a planned retreat, a desperate gamble, or a sudden loss of nerve? The exact reasons for their departure remain a subject of scholarly debate, but its effect was immediate and devastating. The morale of Antony's remaining forces crumbled, and the battle turned decisively in Octavian's favor. The victory at Actium was absolute. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, pursued relentlessly by Octavian's legions. The following year, with Octavian's forces closing in, both Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives, choosing death over capture and humiliation. With their demise, the last formidable challenge to Octavian's singular authority vanished. Egypt, with its immense wealth and fertile lands, became a Roman province, directly administered by Octavian himself, a personal domain that would feed Rome for centuries. The coffers of Rome, depleted by decades of civil strife, were suddenly overflowing. Octavian returned to Rome not as a conqueror, but as a restorer. He understood that the Roman people, exhausted by the ceaseless cycle of civil wars, yearned for stability, for peace, for a return to order. He could have seized absolute power, declared himself king, but he knew such a move would be met with fierce resistance, a betrayal of the very republican ideals he claimed to uphold. Instead, he embarked on a masterful political performance, a slow, deliberate consolidation of power, cloaked in the guise of republican restoration. In 27 BCE, he dramatically appeared before the Senate, offering to lay down his extraordinary powers and restore the republic. The senators, many of whom owed their positions to him, and perhaps fearing the alternative, begged him to retain his authority. It was a carefully choreographed dance, a public affirmation of his indispensable role. The Senate bestowed upon him the title of Augustus, meaning the Revere. D1. A name that carried a weight of religious and moral authority, elevating him above mere mortals. He accepted this new name, a symbolic break from his past as Octavian, the ruthless triumvir. He also accepted the title of Princeps Civitatis, first citizen, a humble-sounding designation that masked the reality of his supreme authority. He held various republican offices concurrently: consul, tribune, pontifex maximus, accumulating powers without ever overtly dismantling the republican framework. He was careful to maintain the appearance of the republic, allowing the Senate to meet, magistrates to be elected, but the true power resided with him, the princeps. This subtle, ingenious system, where ultimate authority was wielded without the overt trappings of monarchy, became the foundation of the Roman Empire. This moment, the settlement of 27 BCE, marked the true beginning of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity that would last for over 2 centuries. Augustus, as he was now known, understood that lasting peace required more than just military victory. It required a profound societal transformation. He embarked on a vast program of public works, repairing roads, building aqueducts, temples, and theaters, restoring the grandeur of Rome itself. He established the Praetorian Guard, a personal elite force that served as his bodyguards and, more subtly, as a constant reminder of his power within the city. He reformed the army, professionalizing it and stationing legions along the frontiers, creating a formidable defensive barrier that secured the vast empire. One of Augustus's lesser-known but significant reforms was the establishment of the cursus publicus, the imperial postal system. This network of relay stations and couriers traversing the vast Roman road system allowed for rapid communication across the empire, facilitating governance, trade, and military coordination. Imagine a message, perhaps from a distant governor in Gaul, carried by a swift rider, relayed from station to station, eventually reaching Rome in a fraction of the time it would have taken before. This logistical marvel, often overlooked in the grand narratives of emperors and battles, was a vital artery of the Pax Romana, knitting the sprawling empire together. Augustus also sought to restore traditional Roman values, promoting marriage, family, and religious piety, often legislating against perceived moral decay. He presented himself as a moral exemplar, living a relatively modest life compared to the excesses of some of his predecessors. He understood the power of propaganda, commissioning poets like Virgil and Horace to celebrate Rome's mythical past and its current golden age under his rule. The Aeneid, Virgil's epic poem, not only glorified Rome's origins, but subtly linked its destiny to Augustus, portraying him as the culmination of divine will. The Pax Romana was not a period entirely free of conflict. Frontier wars were fought to expand or secure borders, and internal rebellions occasionally flared. But these were largely contained and did not threaten the core stability of the empire. The vastness of the empire, stretching from Britain to Egypt, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, was held together by a combination of military might, administrative efficiency, and a shared sense of Roman identity. Trade flourished, facilitated by secure sea lanes and well-maintained roads. Goods from distant lands, spices from the east, timber from the north, grain from Egypt and North Africa, flowed into Rome, enriching its citizens and fueling its economy. The concept of Roman citizenship expanded, gradually incorporating peoples from conquered territories, offering them rights and opportunities within the empire. This policy, a stark contrast to many ancient empires that simply subjugated their conquered populations, fostered a sense of loyalty and integration. Roman law, a sophisticated and evolving system, provided a framework for justice and order across diverse cultures and peoples. The Roman legions, once instruments of conquest, now became guardians of peace, their presence a deterrent to external threats and a symbol of imperial authority. However, historians still debate the true nature of this peace. Was it a genuine era of widespread tranquility and prosperity? Or was it a peace enforced by overwhelming military power, a quiet subjugation of diverse peoples under a single dominant authority? While the absence of large-scale civil wars was undeniable, life for many within the empire, especially the enslaved and the poor, remained harsh. The wealth generated by the empire was not evenly distributed, and the benefits of Roman rule were not universally experienced. Yet, compared to the preceding centuries of incessant warfare and political upheaval, the Pax Romana undeniably represented a profound shift, a period of relative calm that allowed for unprecedented cultural, economic, and architectural development. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, dying in 14 CE at the age of 75. His reign was a testament to his political genius, his ability to transform a war-torn republic into a stable, enduring empire. He had carefully managed the transition, ensuring that his death would not plunge Rome back into chaos. He designated his stepson, Tiberius, as his successor, establishing a dynastic principle. Though he was careful to avoid the term emperor or king, the system he created, a carefully balanced facade of republicanism over a foundation of imperial power, would endure for centuries, shaping the course of Western civilization. His legacy was immense. He had not only ended the civil wars, but had laid the groundwork for an empire that would dominate the Mediterranean world for hundreds of years. The institutions he established, the infrastructure he built, the peace he secured, allowed Roman culture to flourish, producing masterpieces of literature, art, and architecture. The Colosseum, though built by later emperors, stood as a testament to the engineering prowess and public spectacles enabled by the Pax Romana. The vast network of roads, many still visible today, spoke of the interconnectedness and administrative reach of the empire. Perhaps these roads, stretching across mountains and plains, whispered stories of merchants, soldiers, and emperors, carrying the very pulse of Roman life across the vast expanse of its dominion. The period following Augustus, though marked by different personalities and challenges, largely adhered to the framework he had so meticulously crafted. His successors, the Julio-Claudians, then the Flavians, and later the 5 good emperors, continued to expand and consolidate the empire, navigating the complexities of succession, frontier defense, and internal administration. The machinery of the Roman state, honed by Augustus, proved remarkably resilient. The Roman Empire, under the Pax Romana, became a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and technologies, spreading its influence far beyond its borders. Leaving an indelible mark on the world, the echoes of its laws, its language, its architecture, and its very concept of governance would resonate through the ages, shaping the contours of Europe and beyond for millennia to come. The whispers of the Senate, once a chorus of deference, now carried a subtle, dangerous edge. The reign of Tiberius, a shadow stretching across 2 decades, had ended not with a flourish, but with a sigh of relief from many, and a chilling sense of anticipation from others. Into this shifting landscape stepped Gaius, known to history by his childhood nickname, Caligula, Little Boot, a name that once evoked fondness, now would come to symbolize a descent into caprice and terror. His early years on Capri, a virtual prisoner alongside the aging Tiberius, had perhaps warped a mind already prone to instability. For a brief, intoxicating period, his rule began with a glimmer of hope. He abolished the treason trials that had plagued Tiberius's later years, recalled exiles, and even staged lavish games, delighting the Roman populace. The treasury, however, was not limitless, and Caligula's boundless extravagance soon began to drain it. His true nature, or perhaps the full extent of his illness, began to manifest with alarming speed. He squandered fortunes on fantastical projects, like a bridge of boats across the Bay of Baiae, simply to ride his horse across it. His sister Drusilla, whom he openly adored, died, and his grief seemed to plunge him into a deeper madness. He declared himself a living god, demanding worship, a stark departure from the traditional Roman reverence for deceased emperors. Stories, perhaps embellished, but rooted in a terrifying reality, circulated of his cruelty, forcing senators to run for miles before his chariot, executing men for sport, even appointing his favorite horse, Incitatus, to a consulship, or at least threatening to, as a profound insult to the Senate. The atmosphere in Rome became one of pervasive fear, where a misplaced word or a perceived slight could lead to immediate execution. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal protectors, found themselves caught between their duty and the escalating madness. It was this very guard, along with a few disgruntled senators, who finally brought an end to Caligula's 4-year reign in 41 CE, assassinating him in a dark corridor of the palace. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, but a new question arose: who would dare to rule next? In the ensuing chaos, a figure was discovered cowering behind a curtain, trembling with fear. This was Claudius, Caligula's uncle, a man long dismissed as a stammering, awkward intellectual, afflicted with a limp and a nervous twitch. He had been intentionally kept from public life, deemed unfit for leadership. Yet the Praetorian Guard, perhaps seeing an opportunity for influence, or simply seeking a quick resolution to the power vacuum, proclaimed him emperor. To the surprise of many, Claudius proved to be a remarkably capable, if idiosyncratic, ruler. He was a scholar of history and languages, even attempting to reform the Roman alphabet by adding 3 new letters, though these did not endure. His administrative reforms were significant. He greatly expanded the imperial bureaucracy, creating new departments staffed by freedmen who owed their loyalty directly to him. This move, while efficient, often drew the ire of the senatorial aristocracy, who viewed these freedmen with disdain. Claudius also embarked on a bold military venture, the conquest of Britain in 43 CE. This was a challenging undertaking, requiring a massive logistical effort, but it ultimately brought a vast, resource-rich territory into the Roman fold, expanding the empire's northern frontier. He personally visited the island briefly to preside over the triumphal entry into Camulodunum, solidifying his image as a victorious general. Despite his successes, Claudius's reign was plagued by intrigue within his own household, particularly from his ambitious wives. His third wife, Messalina, was notorious for her promiscuity and political machinations, eventually leading to her execution. His fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger, was equally ambitious, determined to secure the succession for her son Nero from a previous marriage. She persuaded Claudius to adopt Nero, pushing aside his own biological son, Britannicus. The circumstances of Claudius's death in 54 CE remain debated. While some sources suggest natural causes, many historians believe Agrippina poisoned him with a dish of mushrooms to hasten Nero's ascent to power. Nero, a mere 17 years old, ascended the throne under the watchful eye of his mother, Agrippina, and his tutors, the philosopher Seneca and the praetorian prefect Burrus. His early reign, guided by these capable men, was marked by relative stability and good governance. He reduced taxes, banned gladiatorial combats that ended in death, and even displayed a keen interest in the arts, particularly music and poetry. However, as he matured, Nero grew increasingly resentful of the influence of others, especially his domineering mother. The first ominous sign of his true character emerged with the murder of Britannicus, Claudius's son, whom Nero saw as a rival in 55 CE. Then, in 59 CE, came the shocking matricide of Agrippina herself, orchestrated by Nero, after repeated attempts to drown her failed. This act sent a shiver through the Roman elite, signaling a dangerous shift in the emperor's psyche. Nero's passion for the arts bordered on obsession, and he yearned for recognition as a great artist rather than a ruler. He performed publicly, singing and playing the lyre, shocking the Roman aristocracy who viewed such activities as beneath an emperor. His artistic pursuits, however, were overshadowed by the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. The fire raged for days, devastating much of the city. While the exact cause remains unknown, perhaps accidental, perhaps arson, rumors quickly spread that Nero himself had started it, or at least played his lyre while Rome burned, supposedly inspired by the destruction of Troy. To deflect suspicion, Nero scapegoated the nascent Christian community, initiating the first widespread persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. He then embarked on an ambitious and costly rebuilding program, including the construction of his opulent golden house, the Domus Aurea, on land cleared by the fire, further fueling public resentment. His increasingly erratic behavior, lavish spending, and brutal suppression of perceived opposition, including the forced suicides of Seneca and the poet Lucan, led to a series of conspiracies and revolts. In 68 CE, facing a widespread rebellion and declared a public enemy by the Senate, Nero fled Rome and ultimately committed suicide, uttering, "Qualis artifex perio," "What an artist dies in me." His death plunged Rome into a year of civil war, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, as various generals vied for the throne. The chaos of 69 CE, a year marked by rapid successions and bloody conflict, finally ended with the emergence of Vespasian, a seasoned general who had been campaigning in Judea. Unlike the aristocratic Julio-Claudians, Vespasian was a man of humble origins, a pragmatic and disciplined soldier. His reign marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty, bringing much-needed stability and fiscal responsibility back to the empire. Vespasian immediately set about restoring order and rebuilding Rome's finances, which had been severely depleted by Nero's extravagance and the civil wars. He famously imposed a tax on public urinals, reportedly quipping, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't smell. His most enduring legacy, however, was the construction of the Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater. A massive arena designed for gladiatorial contests and public spectacles, built on the site of Nero's former pleasure lake. This monumental structure, inaugurated by his son Titus, symbolized Rome's recovery and its enduring power. Vespasian was succeeded by his eldest son, Titus, in 79 CE. Titus had already proven himself a capable military commander, having suppressed the Jewish revolt and destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. His brief reign lasting only 2 years, was marked by two significant disasters: the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a devastating fire in Rome in 80 CE. Titus responded to these calamities with immense compassion and generosity, personally overseeing relief efforts and providing aid to the victims. His benevolent nature and popular appeal earned him the title Delight of Mankind. However, his promising reign was cut short by illness in 81 CE, leaving the throne to his younger, more autocratic brother, Domitian. Domitian, unlike his father and brother, was a more aloof and authoritarian ruler. He preferred to govern through a centralized bureaucracy, often bypassing the Senate, which led to increasing friction. He styled himself as a divine emperor, demanding to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, a title that further alienated the traditional Roman elite. While his reign saw some military successes, particularly along the Rhine and Danube frontiers, and he implemented sound financial policies, his increasing paranoia and cruelty led to a reign of terror in his later years. He launched a series of treason trials, executing many senators and prominent citizens on flimsy charges. This atmosphere of fear culminated in his assassination in 96 CE, orchestrated by members of his own household and the Praetorian Guard. With Domitian's death, the Flavian dynasty ended, and Rome once again faced an uncertain future. However, instead of plunging into another civil war, a remarkable period of stability and prosperity began, known as the Era of the Five Good Emperors. The Senate, perhaps learning from the turbulent past, played a crucial role in selecting Domitian's successor, Nerva, an elderly and respected senator. Nerva's reign was brief, lasting only 16 months, but it was profoundly significant. He restored civil liberties, recalled exiles, and, most importantly, established a new method of succession: adoption. Instead of relying on bloodlines, the reigning emperor would choose and adopt his successor based on merit and capability, ensuring a smooth transition of power and bringing the most qualified individual to the throne. This system, known as adoptive succession, would usher in an unprecedented era of peace and stability. Nerva's chosen successor was Trajan, a highly regarded general of Spanish origin, making him the first emperor from outside Italy. Trajan's reign, from 98 to 117 CE, is widely considered the zenith of the Roman Empire. He was a brilliant military strategist, known for his relentless campaigns that expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. His conquest of Dacia, modern-day Romania, in 2 brutal wars, completed by 106 CE, brought immense wealth in the form of gold mines to Rome. The victories are famously commemorated on Trajan's Column, a towering spiral relief depicting the Dacian Wars in intricate detail, a testament to Roman engineering and military prowess. He also annexed Nabatea, incorporating the wealthy trade city of Petra into the empire. Beyond military conquests, Trajan was a benevolent ruler and a prolific builder. He constructed impressive public works, including the Forum of Trajan, a magnificent complex featuring markets, libraries, and the aforementioned Column. His extensive road network and port improvements facilitated trade and communication across the vast empire. He also implemented social welfare programs, like the Alimenta, which provided financial support for the upbringing of poor children in Italy. Trajan's reign was a golden age, characterized by strong leadership, military success, and public prosperity. Upon Trajan's death in 117 CE, his adopted son, Hadrian, ascended to the throne. Hadrian, also of Spanish origin, was a very different kind of emperor from his predecessor. While Trajan was a conqueror, Hadrian was a consolidator. He recognized that the empire had reached its practical limits and that further expansion would be unsustainable. His policy shifted from conquest to defense and internal consolidation. He famously withdrew from some of Trajan's eastern conquests, such as Mesopotamia, deeming them too difficult to hold. His most famous undertaking was the construction of Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, a formidable defensive barrier stretching 73 miles from coast to coast. Designed to protect Roman Britain from the Pictish tribes to the north, this monumental feat of engineering, built between 122 and 128 CE, stands as a powerful symbol of his reign. Hadrian was also a passionate traveler, spending more than half of his 21-year reign touring the provinces of the empire. He meticulously inspected legions, oversaw construction projects, and engaged with local populations, gaining an intimate understanding of his vast domain. He was a Hellenophile, deeply devoted to Greek culture, art, and philosophy, and he spent considerable time in Athens, where he funded numerous building projects. His architectural legacy in Rome includes the Pantheon, a marvel of engineering with its massive, unreinforced concrete dome, and his sprawling, magnificent villa at Tivoli, a complex of palaces, gardens, and artificial lakes that reflected his travels and eclectic tastes. Hadrian was a highly intelligent, cultured, and complex figure, a true polymath, though his later years were marked by illness and a growing tendency towards suspicion and severity. He died in 138 CE, having carefully chosen his successor, Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius, a senator known for his mild temperament and administrative skill, inherited an empire at its peak. His reign, from 138 to 161 CE, was remarkably peaceful and prosperous, earning him the epithet Pius for his devotion to duty and his respect for tradition. Unlike his predecessors, he undertook no major military campaigns and made no significant territorial acquisitions. His focus was entirely on internal administration, ensuring the efficient functioning of the vast Roman bureaucracy and maintaining the stability of the empire. He continued many of Hadrian's policies, including the Alimenta program, and oversaw extensive public building projects and legal reforms. His reign is often seen as the culmination of the Pax Romana, a period of unparalleled peace and prosperity that had begun with Augustus. He rarely left Italy, preferring to govern from Rome, and his quiet, unassuming leadership fostered an atmosphere of general contentment throughout the empire. Historians still debate the precise reasons for this prolonged period of peace and prosperity under the 5 good emperors. Was it solely due to the adoptive succession system, which ensured competent rulers? Or were there deeper economic and social factors at play, a confluence of favorable conditions that allowed the empire to flourish? Perhaps it was a combination of both, a rare alignment of skilled leadership and a robust, well-established imperial infrastructure. Antoninus Pius, in turn, adopted Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher-statesman, and Lucius Verus, his co-emperor. This marked a departure from the single successor model, as Marcus Aurelius insisted on sharing power with Verus, recognizing his own philosophical inclinations might not be enough for the practicalities of ruling. The death of Antoninus Pius in 161 CE brought Marcus Aurelius to the throne, ushering in the final chapter of the 5 good emperors. The Gilded Age of the Antonines, with its veneer of peace and prosperity, began to fray at the edges. revealing the deep fissures that ran through the heart of the empire. The seeds of its unraveling were sown not in a single catastrophic event, but in a relentless accumulation of pressures that would ultimately plunge Rome into a half-century of chaos known as the crisis of the 3rd century. This was a period when the very survival of the Roman state hung by a thread, a testament to its surprising resilience, even as it seemed to be tearing itself apart. The first tremors of this coming storm could be felt even before the official start of the crisis in 235 CE. The assassination of Emperor Commodus in 192 CE, a figure whose erratic and tyrannical rule starkly contrasted with the benevolent emperors who preceded him, shattered the illusion of stability and unleashed a scramble for power. The year 193 CE, famously known as the Year of the Five Emperors, saw a rapid succession of claimants to the throne, each backed by their own legions. This internal strife set a dangerous precedent, demonstrating that the ultimate authority now lay not with the Senate or even the people of Rome, but with the legions stationed on the far-flung frontiers. The Praetorian Guard, once the emperor's personal protectors, even went so far as to auction off the imperial throne to the highest bidder, a shocking act that underscored the decay of traditional Roman values and institutions. Septimius Severus, a shrewd and capable general from Leptis Magna in North Africa, eventually emerged victorious from this civil war. He understood that the loyalty of the army was paramount and famously advised his sons, Caracalla and Geta, to enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men. This policy, while securing the immediate loyalty of the legions, placed an immense strain in the imperial treasury. He raised soldiers' pay, granted them new privileges, and expanded the army, further militarizing the Roman state. While Severus brought a measure of stability during his reign, 193 to 211 CE, his emphasis on military power over civil administration laid the groundwork for the later dominance of the army in imperial politics. His son, Caracalla, continued this trend, most notably by issuing the Constitutio Antoniniana in 212 CE, which granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. While often presented as an act of generosity, it was primarily a fiscal measure, broadening the tax base to fund the ever-growing military expenditures. However, it also blurred the lines between Romans and provincials, further integrating diverse populations into the Roman fabric, yet perhaps diluting the very essence of what it meant to be Roman. The true maelstrom began in 235 CE with the assassination of Emperor Severus Alexander, the last of the Severan dynasty. He was murdered by his own troops, who were frustrated by his perceived weakness in dealing with Germanic incursions along the Rhine frontier. In his place, the legions elevated Maximinus Thrax, a formidable Thracian soldier who had risen through the ranks solely on his military prowess. He was a man of immense physical stature and little political experience, and his elevation signaled the beginning of an era where emperors were made and unmade by the army, often with brutal swiftness. For the next 50 years, from 235 to 284 CE, the Roman Empire endured an almost ceaseless cycle of civil wars, usurpations, and assassinations. Historians still debate the exact number, but it is generally accepted that there were at least 26 legitimate emperors during this period, alongside numerous ephemeral pretenders who held power for mere months or even weeks. This rapid turnover of leadership meant that no emperor could truly establish long-term policies or consolidate power. Their primary focus was on survival, either fighting off rival claimants or defending the empire from increasingly aggressive external threats. The constant internal conflict left the frontiers vulnerable. The Sasanian Empire, a formidable new Persian power, rose in the east, replacing the Parthians and posing a far more organized and aggressive threat. Their king, Shapur I, inflicted a series of humiliating defeats on Rome, culminating in the capture of Emperor Valerian in 260 CE. Valerian's fate, dying in Persian captivity, possibly even used as a footstool by Shapur, was an unprecedented blow to Roman prestige and a stark symbol of the empire's vulnerability. In the West, Germanic tribes like the Goths, Alemanni, and Franks, sensing Roman weakness, launched devastating raids deep into imperial territory. They crossed the Rhine and Danube, plundering cities, enslaving populations, and even reaching as far as Italy and Greece. The Goths, for example, sacked Athens in 267 CE, a city steeped in classical history, a stark reminder that no corner of the empire was truly safe. The economic consequences of this perpetual warfare were catastrophic. Trade routes were disrupted, agricultural lands lay fallow due to raids and conscription, and cities were plundered. The imperial government, desperate to fund its ever-growing army and pay off mutinous legions, resorted to debasing the coinage. They reduced the silver content of the denarius and later the antoninianus, a new, larger silver coin introduced by Caracalla, replacing it with cheaper base metals like copper and bronze. By the mid-3rd century, some coins contained less than 5% silver, rendering them almost worthless. This led to rampant inflation, as merchants demanded more and more of the debased currency for their goods. People lost faith in the currency, leading to a return to barter in many regions. The urban centers, once vibrant hubs of commerce, declined as populations fled to the countryside for safety and self-sufficiency. The once robust Roman tax system struggled to collect revenue from an impoverished populace and a fragmented economy. The crisis also saw the temporary fragmentation of the empire. In the West, a general named Postumus declared himself emperor of a breakaway Gallic empire in 260 CE. Encompassing Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania, he established his own capital, issued his own coinage, and ruled effectively for over a decade, providing a measure of stability to his territories that the central Roman government could not. Simultaneously, in the east, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, a brilliant and ambitious ruler, established the Palmyrene Empire, seizing control of Syria, Egypt, and parts of Asia Minor. For a time, it seemed as if the Roman Empire would permanently splinter into 3 distinct entities. This lesser-known detail of regional empires, rising from the ashes of central authority, highlights the desperate measures taken by local leaders to protect their populations when Rome itself could not. Amidst this turmoil, a sense of profound pessimism and despair permeated Roman society. The traditional Roman gods seemed to have abandoned them, leading to a rise in new religious cults, particularly those promising salvation or a more personal connection to the divine. Christianity, though still a minority religion, continued to spread, offering solace and community in a world that felt increasingly unstable. The emperors, desperate to reassert traditional values and perhaps blame a scapegoat for their misfortunes, occasionally launched persecutions against Christians. Most notably under Decius, 250 to 251 CE, and Valerian, 257 to 259 CE. These persecutions, while brutal, ultimately failed to stem the tide of Christianity's growth. The constant movement of troops and the disruption of civilian life also led to a series of devastating plagues, further decimating the population. The Plague of Cyprian, which began around 250 CE, raged for 2 decades, killing millions, and further weakening the empire's ability to resist its myriad challenges. It is thought to have been a form of small pox or measles, and its impact was profound, contributing to labor shortages and a general sense of decline. The military itself underwent a significant transformation during this period. The traditional legions, designed for offensive warfare, proved less effective against fast-moving raiding parties. The army became increasingly defensive, relying more on cavalry and smaller, more flexible units. Soldiers were often recruited from the frontier provinces, sometimes even from among barbarian tribes, blurring the lines between Roman and non-Roman. The quality of Roman military equipment and training also declined, as resources were scarce and the emphasis shifted from disciplined maneuver to sheer numbers. The urban landscape of the empire also changed dramatically. Cities, once open and sprawling, began to wall themselves off for protection. Walls were built around Rome itself under Emperor Aurelian, a clear admission that the heart of the empire was no longer inviolable. This defensive posture reflected a profound shift in mindset, from expansion and conquest to survival and protection. The turning point, the beginning of the end of the crisis, came with the ascension of a series of barracks emperors, who, despite their short reigns, were remarkably effective military leaders. Claudius Gothicus, 268 to 270 CE, inflicted a decisive defeat on the Goths at the Battle of Nisus in 268 CE, pushing them back across the Danube. His successor, Aurelian, 270 to 275 CE, earned the title Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. He was a soldier of immense energy and determination, who, in a remarkably short period, reunified the empire. He first defeated the Alemanni, who had invaded Italy, then marched east to dismantle Zenobia's Palmyrene Empire, capturing the queen herself. Finally, he turned west, peacefully negotiating the reintegration of the Gallic Empire into the Roman fold. Aurelian's reign, though cut short by assassination, demonstrated that the empire, despite its deep wounds, still possessed the capacity for recovery. He understood that strong, centralized authority was essential, and he began to promote the idea of the emperor as a divine figure, Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, laying the groundwork for the autocratic rule of later emperors. The crisis of the 3rd century was a crucible that forged a new Rome. The old institutions, the Senate, and the traditional republican ideals had been largely eclipsed by the military. The empire that emerged from this period was fundamentally different, more militarized, more centralized, and more autocratic. Its economy was shattered, its population reduced, and its frontiers constantly threatened. Yet, it had survived. This period, often overlooked in favor of the more glorious eras, was perhaps the most crucial test of Rome's resilience. It showed that even when facing internal collapse and external onslaughts on all sides, the idea of Rome, the sheer weight of its administrative and military apparatus, was incredibly difficult to extinguish. The foundations were laid for the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine, who would attempt to rebuild the empire on a new, more rigid footing, but the scars of the crisis would forever remain etched upon the Roman soul. Perhaps these difficult years were a necessary, if brutal, purification, stripping away the excesses and forcing the empire to confront its deepest vulnerabilities, preparing it for a future that would be vastly different from its glorious past. The empire, vast and sprawling, found itself at a crossroads, its very foundations seemingly shifting beneath the weight of its own grandeur. The crisis of the 3rd century had left scars, deep fissures in the political and economic landscape. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, often at the whim of their legions, and the once unquestioned authority of Rome seemed to fray at the edges. It was into this turbulent sea that a new figure emerged, one who would grasp the reins of power with a firm hand and attempt to steer the colossal ship back towards stability. Diocletian. Born in humble circumstances in Dalmatia, Diocletian, originally named Diocles, ascended through the military ranks, a testament to his strategic mind and unwavering resolve. When he was proclaimed emperor by his troops in 284 CE, the empire was a patchwork of warring factions and economic distress. He understood, perhaps more acutely than any emperor before him, that the sheer scale of the empire had become its greatest vulnerability. Governing such a vast territory from a single center was proving impossible, especially with constant threats along the frontiers and internal revolts simmering. His solution was audacious, a radical restructuring that would fundamentally alter the very nature of Roman governance. The Tetrarchy. Imagine the empire not as a single, indivisible entity, but as four distinct yet interconnected administrative zones. Diocletian divided the empire into an eastern and western half, each ruled by an Augustus, a senior emperor. To assist each Augustus, a junior emperor, known as a Caesar, was appointed. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. 2 Augusti, 2 Caesars, each responsible for a specific region, allowing for swifter responses to local threats and more efficient administration. Diocletian himself took the east, with his capital effectively established in Nicomedia, closer to the persistent Sasanian threat. Maximian, his trusted colleague, governed the west from Mediolanum, modern Milan, while the Caesars, Constantius Chlorus and Galerius, oversaw Britannia and Gaul and the Balkans, respectively. This system, inaugurated around 293 CE, brought a much-needed period of relative peace and stability after decades of chaos. But Diocletian's reforms extended far beyond mere political restructuring. He was a meticulous administrator, a man who believed in order and control. He sought to stabilize the economy, which had been ravaged by inflation and debasement of coinage. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices in 301 CE, an ambitious, though ultimately unsuccessful, attempt to curb inflation by setting price ceilings for goods and wages across the empire. While well-intentioned, it proved difficult to enforce and often led to black markets and shortages. He also reformed the tax system, shifting towards a more standardized assessment based on land and population, a system that, while more efficient, also placed a heavier burden on the populace. The military, too, underwent significant changes, growing in size and becoming more centralized, with a clearer distinction between frontier defense forces and mobile field armies. Yet, perhaps the most profound, and certainly the most tragic, aspect of Diocletian's reign was his religious policy. A staunch traditionalist, he viewed the burgeoning Christian faith with suspicion. Its refusal to participate in the traditional Roman cults, to offer sacrifices to the emperor and the state gods, was seen not merely as a matter of personal belief, but as an act of disloyalty, a threat to the very fabric of Roman society and its divine favor. What began as local persecutions under earlier emperors escalated dramatically under Diocletian. From 303 CE onwards, a series of edicts were issued, initiating what would become known as the Great Persecution. Churches were destroyed, scriptures burned, and Christians were stripped of their rights, imprisoned, tortured, and executed for their faith. It was a brutal, systematic attempt to eradicate Christianity from the empire, a testament to the deep-seated fear and misunderstanding that traditional Roman authorities held towards this new, rapidly spreading religion. Diocletian's legacy is complex, a tapestry woven with threads of brilliant reform and harsh repression. In a move that truly astonished the Roman world, he voluntarily abdicated his throne in 305 CE, compelling Maximian to do the same. He retired to his magnificent palace in Split on the Dalmatian coast, a rare emperor to die peacefully in his bed. He believed his tetrarchy would ensure a smooth succession, a perpetual cycle of senior and junior emperors. But the ink was barely dry on his retirement papers before the carefully constructed system began to unravel. The Caesars, now Augusti, soon found themselves vying for power, and the dream of a peaceful transfer of authority dissolved into a series of civil wars. It was from the crucible of these conflicts that another pivotal figure would rise, one whose name would become synonymous with a new era for Rome and for the world: Constantine. Born in Nisus, modern Niš, Serbia, around 272 CE, the son of Constantius Chlorus, one of Diocletian's Caesars, Constantine grew up immersed in the military and political life of the empire. When his father died in York in 306 CE, his troops immediately proclaimed Constantine as Augustus. This act, while popular with the legions, was a direct challenge to the established tetrarchic order, which dictated that Galerius, the senior Augustus, should appoint the new Caesar. The stage was set for a struggle for supremacy. The ensuing years were marked by a series of intense power struggles. Constantine, a shrewd military commander and an even shrewder politician, steadily consolidated his power. His most famous victory came in 312 CE at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome. Facing Maxentius, the self-proclaimed emperor in Italy, Constantine's forces were outnumbered. It is here, on the eve of this decisive battle, that the legend of Constantine's conversion begins to take shape. Accounts vary, but the most widely accepted story, recounted by the Christian historian Eusebius of Caesarea, tells of Constantine seeing a vision in the sky, a cross of light, or perhaps the Chi Rho symbol, the first two Greek letters of Christ's name, with the inscription, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you shall conquer." Whether a genuine spiritual revelation, a strategic political move, or a combination of both, Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. They won a resounding victory, Maxentius drowning in the Tiber. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge marked a turning point, not just for Constantine, but for Christianity itself. In 313 CE, Constantine, now the undisputed ruler of the Western Roman Empire, met with Licinius, the Augustus of the East, in Milan. Together, they issued the Edict of Milan, a landmark decree that granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. It did not make Christianity the official religion, but it ended the persecutions and restored confiscated church property. For Christians who had suffered under Diocletian's brutal crackdown, it was nothing short of a miracle, a dramatic shift from being a persecuted minority to a legally recognized and protected faith. Constantine's relationship with Christianity deepened over time. He saw himself, perhaps, as divinely appointed to lead the empire, and the Christian God as the source of his victories. He began to favor Christians, appointing them to high office, funding the construction of magnificent churches, and even intervening in theological disputes. He convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, bringing together bishops from across the empire to address the Arian controversy, a major theological dispute concerning the nature of Christ. This council, presided over by Constantine himself, established the Nicene Creed, a foundational statement of Christian belief, and underscored the emperor's growing role as a patron and even a shaper of Christian doctrine. While Constantine's conversion and subsequent patronage of Christianity are undeniable. Historians still debate the true depth of his personal faith. Was it a genuine spiritual awakening, or a pragmatic recognition of Christianity's growing influence and a shrewd political move to harness its organizational power and moral authority? Perhaps it was a gradual process, a slow unfolding of conviction, intertwined with the realities of imperial governance. What is clear is that his actions irrevocably altered the religious landscape of the Roman Empire, setting it on a path that would culminate in Christianity becoming the dominant and eventually the official religion of the state. Beyond religion, Constantine continued the administrative reforms initiated by Diocletian, further centralizing power and refining the imperial bureaucracy. He also undertook a monumental project that would forever bear his name, the founding of a new capital city. Recognizing the strategic advantages of the East, its proximity to vital trade routes, and its defensible position, he chose the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, situated on the Bosporus. In 330 CE, after years of extensive construction, he formally dedicated the city as Nova Roma, New Rome. It quickly became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. This move was not merely a symbolic gesture, it was a profound shift in the empire's center of gravity, foreshadowing the eventual division and the enduring legacy of the Eastern Roman Empire, which would thrive for another 1,000 years after the West had fallen. Constantine's reign was one of profound transformation. He unified the empire under a single ruler once more, albeit through bloody civil wars. He laid the groundwork for a Christian empire, fundamentally altering the relationship between state and religion. He established a new capital that would become a beacon of learning and power for centuries. When he died in 337 CE, having been baptized on his deathbed, he left behind an empire vastly different from the one he had inherited. The pagan temples still stood, but the cross was now a prominent symbol. The old gods had not vanished, but their influence was waning, eclipsed by the rising star of Christ. The transition was not without its complexities. While Christianity gained imperial favor, the old pagan traditions persisted, particularly in rural areas. The very word pagan derives from the Latin paganus, meaning country dweller. There were moments of tension, even reversals, such as the brief reign of Julian the Apostate, Constantine's nephew, who attempted to restore paganism in the mid-4th century. But his efforts were ultimately unsuccessful and short-lived. The momentum was with Christianity. Emperors like Theodosius I, towards the end of the 4th century, would take the final decisive steps, making Nicene Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire and actively suppressing pagan worship. The empire, now officially Christian, faced new challenges. The very unity that Constantine had sought to establish was constantly tested by internal theological disputes and the relentless pressure from barbarian tribes along its vast frontiers. The division between East and West, though temporarily overcome by Constantine, would solidify again after his death, driven by linguistic, cultural, and political differences. The Latin-speaking West, facing increasingly dire economic and military pressures, would slowly but inexorably decline, while the Greek-speaking East, with its new capital of Constantinople, would flourish, developing into the Byzantine Empire. The legacy of Diocletian and Constantine is intertwined, a testament to two powerful figures who in their distinct ways reshaped the Roman world. Diocletian, the stern traditionalist, saw to restore order through rigorous reform and a return to perceived Roman virtues, even if it meant brutal persecution. Constantine, the visionary and pragmatic leader, embraced a new faith, forging a path that would lead to a Christianized empire, a new capital, and a profound reorientation of imperial identity. Their reigns marked the end of the classical Roman Empire, as it had been known for centuries, and ushered in a new era, one defined by Christian faith. A divided administration, and the slow, complex transformation from an ancient superpower to a medieval civilization. The echoes of their decisions would resonate for millennia, shaping not only the fate of Rome, but the very course of Western civilization itself. The vast empire, once a single shimmering entity stretching from the mists of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Syria, began to feel the strain of its own immense weight. The year 395 CE marked a pivotal moment, a formal sundering that, while seemingly administrative at the time, would prove irrevocably profound. Upon the death of Emperor Theodosius I, his two young sons, Arcadius and Honorius, inherited the two halves of the Roman world. Arcadius, the elder, took the east with its ancient capital of Constantinople, a city vibrant and wealthy, strategically placed at the crossroads of continents. Honorius, still a boy, was given the west, a sprawling territory whose heart still beat, however faintly, in Rome. This division, born of convenience and dynastic succession, formalized a divergence that had been growing for decades, if not centuries. The West, with its Latin tongue and agrarian economy, and the East, with its Greek language and bustling trade networks, had always possessed distinct cultural flavors. Now, they were separate political entities, each with its own emperor, its own bureaucracy, its own destiny. The West, however, found itself increasingly vulnerable. Its frontiers, vast and thinly defended, became porous membranes through which peoples from beyond the Rhine and Danube began to flow. These were not always invading armies in the traditional sense, but often migrating groups, displaced by pressures further east, seeking new lands and opportunities within the empire's borders. The Goths, a Germanic people, had already been a significant presence for some time, their relationship with Rome a complex tapestry of alliance and conflict. In 410 CE, under the leadership of Alaric, the Visigoths famously sacked the city of Rome itself. For 3 days, the Eternal City, which had not fallen to a foreign enemy in nearly 8 centuries, endured plunder. Though the physical damage was limited, the psychological impact was immeasurable. It was a shockwave that reverberated across the known world, a stark symbol of the empire's waning power, prompting Augustine to write his monumental City of God in response, seeking to explain such a catastrophe within a divine framework. The very fabric of imperial authority in the West began to fray. The legions, once the invincible backbone of Rome, were increasingly composed of non-Roman recruits, often Germanic federates who fought for pay and land rather than a deep-seated loyalty to the Roman ideal. Local aristocrats and landowners, facing dwindling imperial support, began to rely on their own private armies, creating localized power centers that further eroded the central government's control. The economy, too, suffered. Trade routes, once secure, became perilous. Cities, once vibrant hubs of commerce and culture, began to shrink as populations sought refuge in the countryside, leading to a more decentralized, agrarian existence. The magnificent Roman road network, a testament to imperial engineering, slowly began to fall into disrepair in many regions, mirroring the fragmentation of the empire itself. One often overlooked detail in this period of decline is the curious case of the Roman mints. As the empire struggled with economic instability and the constant need to fund its armies, the quality of its coinage steadily declined. Gold and silver coins, once pure and reliable, were increasingly debased with cheaper metals. This rampant inflation, though not the sole cause, certainly exacerbated the economic woes of the West, making it difficult for the government to collect taxes effectively or pay its soldiers reliably, further weakening its already strained resources. Imagine the frustration of a common citizen watching the very currency in their hand lose its value, a tangible sign of the world shifting beneath their feet. The procession of emperors in the West became a rapid, often violent, succession of short reigns, many of them puppets of powerful barbarian generals who held the real power behind the throne. These generals, often of Germanic descent, but deeply Romanized, like Ricimer in the mid-5th century, wielded immense influence, making and unmaking emperors at will. Ricimer, for example, effectively controlled the Western Empire for 16 years, installing 4 different emperors during his tenure. This period highlights a fascinating scholarly dispute. Was the fall of the Western Roman Empire a sudden, cataclysmic event, or a slow, drawn-out process of transformation? Some historians argue for a gradual decline in transformation, pointing to the continued existence of Roman institutions and culture long after 476 CE, particularly in the East. Others emphasize the dramatic ruptures and the undeniable loss of centralized imperial authority in the West. Perhaps it was both, a long, drawn-out process punctuated by moments of acute crisis, like the sack of Rome, that served as stark reminders of an irreversible shift. The Vandals, another Germanic group, established a powerful kingdom in North Africa in the 430s, seizing the vital grain-producing provinces that had long fed Rome. Their control of the Mediterranean's shipping lanes meant that Rome, already struggling, faced severe food shortages. In 455 CE, the Vandals, under their king Gaiseric, launched a second, even more devastating sack of Rome, lasting for 14 days. This time, the city was systematically stripped of its treasures, including the golden menorah and other sacred objects from the temple in Jerusalem, which Titus had brought to Rome centuries earlier. The loss of North Africa was a critical blow, depriving the Western Empire of a crucial economic base and a strategic buffer. It was like a body losing a vital organ, slowly but surely succumbing to the inevitable. The relentless pressure continued. The Huns, under their fearsome leader Attila, swept across Europe in the mid-5th century, their arrival sending shockwaves of terror. Though Attila famously turned back from Rome after a meeting with Pope Leo I in 452 CE, their presence further destabilized the already fragile western provinces, pushing other Germanic tribes into Roman territory. The battles of this era were often desperate affairs, fought by dwindling Roman forces alongside their barbarian allies against other barbarian groups. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 CE, where the Roman general Aetius, often called the last of the Romans, allied with Visigoths to defeat Attila's Huns, was a Pyrrhic victory, showcasing the empire's reliance on the very peoples it struggled to contain. The political fragmentation accelerated. Britain, for example, had largely been abandoned by Roman legions in the early 5th century, left to fend for itself against Saxon raiders. This withdrawal marked the beginning of a new era for the island, one that would eventually lead to the emergence of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Gaul, too, saw the rise of independent kingdoms, the Visigoths in the southwest, the Burgundians in the southeast, and the Franks, who would eventually emerge as the dominant power in the north. Spain became home to the Visigothic kingdom, while North Africa was firmly under Vandal control. Italy itself, the heartland of the empire, became a patchwork of shifting allegiances and competing powers. The year 476 CE is traditionally cited as the end of the Western Roman Empire. In that year, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a young boy whose name ironically echoed the city's legendary founder and its first emperor. Odoacer did not take the title of emperor for himself, but instead sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern Emperor Zeno as the sole legitimate emperor. This act, while seemingly a mere formality, marked the end of a continuous line of Western Roman emperors stretching back to Augustus. It was not a sudden collapse, but rather the final act in a long, great, drawn-out drama. The empire had not so much fallen as it had dissolved, its authority slowly bleeding away, its institutions transforming, its lands absorbed by new, dynamic kingdoms. Yet, the legacy of Rome did not simply vanish. Its laws, its language, its administrative structures, its architectural styles, and above all, its Christian faith, continued to shape the emerging societies of Western Europe. The barbarian kings who now ruled former Roman territories often adopted Roman titles, employed Roman administrators, and even sought legitimacy from the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople. The dream of Rome, of a universal empire, continued to inspire rulers for centuries to come, from Charlemagne to the Holy Roman Emperors. The transformation was profound, but the echoes of the empire lingered, woven into the very fabric of the new world that emerged from its dissolution. Perhaps the stones of the Forum, now silent and crumbling, still whispered stories of the legions and emperors to the stars, a testament to an empire that, even in its decline, left an indelible mark on the course of human history. The Western Roman Empire had ceased to exist as a unified political entity, but its spirit, like a phantom limb, continued to exert an influence long after its physical form had faded. The year 476 AD often rings with a certain finality, a symbolic chime marking the end of an era. It was then that Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, deposed the young Western Roman Emperor Romulus Augustulus, sending the imperial regalia not to a new emperor in the West, but to the Eastern Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. This act, more than any single battle or siege, is frequently cited as the formal end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet, the story is far more nuanced than a simple collapse. The empire had been unraveling for generations, its vast territories increasingly governed by Germanic kings who in many ways saw themselves as successors to Roman authority, even as they carved out their own domains. The city of Rome itself had been sacked twice in the 5th century, first by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410 AD, an event that sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean world, and again by the Vandals in 455 AD. These were not mere raids, they were deeply humiliating blows to the heart of what had once been an unassailable power, revealing the vulnerability of an empire stretched thin and fractured from within. The pressures on the Western Empire were manifold. Economic decline, exacerbated by constant warfare and the disruption of trade routes, had crippled its ability to maintain its vast armies. The sheer cost of defense, coupled with a shrinking tax base, created a perpetual crisis. Political instability was rampant, with emperors often rising and falling at the whim of powerful generals, many of whom were themselves of barbarian descent. The empire had become a mosaic of competing interests, its central authority increasingly nominal outside of Italy. The movement of various Germanic tribes, the Goths, Vandals, Franks, and others, was not a sudden invasion, but a complex, centuries-long process of migration, settlement, and often integration into Roman society, sometimes as allies, sometimes as adversaries. These groups often sought land and recognition, and as the empire weakened, they increasingly asserted their independence, establishing kingdoms within its former borders. Consider the example of the Visigoths. After sacking Rome, they eventually settled in Hispania and Gaul, establishing a powerful kingdom that blended Roman legal traditions with Germanic customs. Or the Franks, who under Clovis in the late 5th and early 6th centuries consolidated power in Gaul, laying the foundations for what would become France. These new kingdoms did not always seek to destroy Roman culture. Rather, they often absorbed and adapted it, recognizing the prestige and administrative efficacy of Roman institutions. Latin remained the language of administration and the church, and Roman law continued to influence local governance. The transition was less a sudden cataclysmic fall and more a gradual transformation, a slow reordering of power and identity across the Western European landscape. While the Western Empire fragmented, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, not only survived, but thrived, continuing the Roman legacy for another 1,000 years. This empire, which we now call Byzantium, was strategically located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, controlling vital trade routes and possessing a more robust economy than its Western counterpart. Its capital, Constantinople, founded by Emperor Constantine in 330 AD, was a magnificent city, heavily fortified and boasting a vibrant intellectual and cultural life. Unlike Rome, which had been repeatedly sacked, Constantinople remained largely impregnable for centuries, its massive walls and strategic position protecting it from invaders. The Byzantine Empire maintained a strong centralized government, a sophisticated bureaucracy, and a well-trained army and navy. Its legal system, codified by Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian's Code, became the foundation of civil law in much of Europe and continues to influence legal systems today. This monumental legal work was not merely a compilation. It was a systematic organization and clarification of centuries of Roman law, a testament to Byzantium's commitment to preserving and refining its Roman heritage. Justinian's reign, 527 to 565 AD, also saw ambitious attempts to reconquer lost Western territories, most notably parts of Italy and North Africa, demonstrating Byzantium's enduring claim to the full Roman legacy. Though these reconquests were ultimately unsustainable in the long term, they highlight the Eastern Empire's perception of itself as the true continuation of Rome. One of the fascinating aspects of Byzantium is its distinct cultural evolution. While undeniably Roman in its origins, it gradually developed its own unique character, blending Roman traditions with Greek language and culture, and deeply influenced by Orthodox Christianity. Greek became the dominant administrative language in the 7th century, replacing Latin, further distinguishing it from the Latin-speaking West. The Byzantine emperors saw themselves as God's representatives on earth, ruling over a Christian empire that was the earthly reflection of the heavenly kingdom. This deep intertwining of church and state, known as Caesaropapism, gave the emperor immense religious as well as political authority. Yet, historians still debate the precise moment when the Eastern Roman Empire truly became Byzantine? Was it with the founding of Constantinople, the adoption of Greek as the official language, or perhaps the schism with the Western Church in 1054 AD? There is no single answer, as the transformation was gradual, a slow evolution rather than a sharp break. Some scholars argue that the term Byzantine itself, coined centuries later by Western historians, obscures the fact that its inhabitants always referred to themselves as Romans, Romeoi. This enduring self-identity speaks volumes about their connection to the ancient empire, even as their customs, language, and religious practices diverged from those of the Latin West. The survival of Byzantium had profound implications for the course of European history. It acted as a bulwark against invasions from the East, absorbing the initial shock of the Arab expansion in the 7th century, and later, the pressures from various Turkic peoples. Without Byzantium, the trajectory of Western Europe might have been vastly different, perhaps exposed to these forces much earlier and more directly. Byzantium also served as a crucial preserver of classical learning. While much of Western Europe entered a period of relative intellectual decline after the fall of Rome, Byzantine scholars meticulously copied and studied ancient Greek texts, including the works of Plato, Aristotle, and the great Greek dramatists. This preservation was vital. Many of these texts would have been lost to humanity had they not been safeguarded in Constantinople, only to be rediscovered by Western scholars during the Renaissance, fueling a revival of classical knowledge. Consider the city of Constantinople itself, a marvel of engineering and urban planning. Its triple line of Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, stood as an almost impenetrable barrier for a millennium. These walls, rising majestically from the landscape, were a testament to Roman engineering prowess, designed to withstand the most formidable sieges. Imagine the sight of them, stretching for miles, punctuated by imposing towers and gates, protecting a city that was a hub of commerce, art, and learning. The Hagia Sophia, built by Justinian in the 6th century, was another architectural wonder, a massive dome seemingly suspended from the heavens, its interior adorned with glittering mosaics. It was a symbol of imperial power and religious devotion, a space where the earthly and the divine seemed to converge. For centuries, it was the largest cathedral in the world, a testament to Byzantine artistic and engineering genius. The Byzantine Empire was not without its own struggles. It faced constant external threats from the Sasanian Persians, the Arabs, the Bulgars, the Rus, and later the Seljuk and Ottoman Turks. Internally, it grappled with religious controversies, such as the iconoclastic controversy in the 8th and 9th centuries, which saw a bitter struggle over the use of religious images. Dynastic struggles and political assassinations were also not uncommon. Yet, despite these challenges, the empire demonstrated remarkable resilience, adapting and evolving to survive. Its diplomatic skill, often employing a combination of alliances, bribery, and military might, was as crucial as its armies in preserving its existence. The legacy of the Roman Empire, therefore, did not simply vanish in 476 AD. In the West, it transformed, giving rise to new kingdoms that built upon its ruins, gradually forging the nations of medieval and modern Europe. Its legal principles, architectural forms, and most enduringly, its language, Latin, continued to shape the nascent European identity. The Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome, also inherited much of the Roman administrative structure and spiritual authority, becoming a powerful unifying force in the fragmented West. In the East, the Roman Empire continued as Byzantium, a vibrant, distinct civilization that preserved classical learning, developed unique artistic and architectural styles, and defended Christendom against Eastern incursions. Its influence spread far beyond its borders, shaping the culture, religion, and political systems of Eastern Europe, particularly Russia and the Slavic world, through the adoption of Orthodox Christianity and the Cyrillic alphabet. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 AD, a date often seen as the end of the Middle Ages, truly marked the final demise of the Roman Empire, over 1,000 years after its Western counterpart had seemingly ceased to exist. So, when we speak of the fall of Rome, it is essential to remember that it was not a single, sudden event, but a complex, multifaceted process of decline, transformation, and continuation. The Western Empire's dissolution paved the way for a new European order, while the Eastern Empire carried the torch of Roman civilization for centuries, a beacon of learning and power in the East. Perhaps the walls of Constantinople, standing tall against the tides of history, whispered stories not of an end, but of an enduring legacy, a Roman spirit that simply changed its form and its name, continuing to shape the world long after the last Western emperor was deposed. The echoes of Rome, in its laws, its languages, its architecture, and its very concept of empire, continued to reverberate across continents and centuries, a testament to its profound and lasting impact on human civilization. The year 476 AD often echoes through history as the definitive end, a final curtain falling upon the Western Roman Empire. Yet, even as the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, the story of Rome was far from over. The structures, the ideas, the very breath of Roman civilization had already seeped deeply into the soil of the lands it once governed, roots that would continue to nourish new growth for centuries to come. The grand aqueducts, though some fell into disrepair, continued to channel water to burgeoning settlements, their arches standing as silent testaments to an engineering prowess that would not be matched for 1,000 years. The intricate network of roads, though less meticulously maintained, still served as arteries for trade and communication, connecting disparate communities across the European continent. The legal framework, codified and refined over centuries, did not vanish with the imperial purple. The Justinian Code, compiled in the Eastern Roman Empire in the 6th century, would serve as the bedrock for civil law in countless European nations, influencing legal systems from Germany to France, and even indirectly shaping common law traditions. Concepts like property rights, contracts, and the very idea of justice under a written law were Roman gifts that continued to define societies long after the legions had disbanded. Imagine a merchant in medieval Venice negotiating a trade agreement, perhaps unknowingly invoking principles first articulated by Roman jurists centuries before, or a scholar in a monastic scriptorium, poring over ancient texts, finding wisdom in the philosophical treatises of Seneca or the historical narratives of Livy. Latin, the language of Virgil and Cicero, persisted not merely as a relic, but as a living, evolving force. It became the lingua franca of scholarship, diplomacy, and the nascent Christian church. While vulgar Latin diversified into the Romance languages, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, the classical tongue remained the intellectual backbone of Europe. For over a millennium, serious academic discourse, theological debate, and international correspondence were conducted in Latin. Even today, the echoes of Latin resonate in our everyday vocabulary, in scientific nomenclature, and in legal terminology. The very alphabet we use, the Roman alphabet, is a direct inheritance, a tangible link to that ancient world. The architectural legacy was equally profound. The dome, the arch, concrete, these innovations, perfected by Roman builders, continued to inspire. From the Pantheon, repurposed as a church, to the structural principles underpinning medieval cathedrals, the influence was undeniable. The sheer scale and ambition of Roman construction left an indelible mark, reminding subsequent generations of what grand collective effort could achieve. One might walk through the ruins of an ancient Roman forum and then gaze upon a Renaissance palazzo, recognizing the subtle yet persistent thread of architectural continuity. Politically, the ghost of Rome haunted the imagination of rulers for centuries. Charlemagne, crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD, consciously sought to revive the imperial glory, though his empire was vastly different in scope and character. The very title, emperor, carried immense prestige, a direct homage to the Roman tradition. Even the concept of a centralized, bureaucratic state, however imperfectly realized in the medieval period, owed a debt to Roman administrative models. The idea of a universal empire, even if only a spiritual one under the Pope, was a lingering echo of Rome's dominion. Meanwhile, in the East, the city of Constantinople, founded by Constantine, continued to flourish as the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, which we now often refer to as the Byzantine Empire. For another 1,000 years, until its fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, Byzantium carried the torch of Roman tradition. Its emperors saw themselves as direct successors to Augustus and Diocletian. They preserved Roman law, cultivated classical Greek and Latin scholarship, and maintained a sophisticated administrative system. The Hippodrome in Constantinople, though a shadow of Rome's Circus Maximus, still hosted chariot races, echoing the ancient Roman passion for spectacle. The Hagia Sophia, with its colossal dome, stood as a testament to both Roman engineering and Christian faith, a vibrant center of artistic and intellectual life. Historians still debate the precise moment of Rome's fall. Was it a catastrophic event in 476 AD, or a gradual transformation, a slow metamorphosis over centuries? Some argue that the empire never truly fell, but simply evolved, its institutions adapting, its culture blending with new influences. The Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, these Germanic peoples, often portrayed as destroyers, were also inheritors. They adopted Roman customs, served in Roman armies, and often sought to integrate into, rather than obliterate, the existing Roman order. The very concept of barbarian invasions itself is a complex one, with many of these groups seeking not to destroy Rome, but to participate in its wealth and prestige. Consider the kingdom of the Ostrogoths in Italy under Theodoric the Great in the early 6th century. Theodoric, though a Goth, admired Roman culture and sought to maintain Roman institutions, employing Roman administrators and respecting Roman law. He issued coins bearing the image of the Roman emperor, even though the Western Empire had ceased to exist in its traditional form. This blending of cultures, this gradual absorption of new peoples into the Roman sphere, or rather, the Roman sphere into new peoples, suggests a continuity rather than an abrupt end. The legacy of Rome is not a static monument, but a living current, flowing through the veins of Western civilization. Its influence is woven into the fabric of our laws, our languages, our architecture, and even our political thought. The ideals of civic duty, public service, and the rule of law, though often imperfectly realized, find their roots in Roman philosophy. The very concept of a unified, expansive state, capable of governing diverse peoples under a single legal framework, was a Roman innovation that continued to inspire and challenge subsequent generations. Even in the quiet contemplation of a star-filled night, one might recall the Roman astronomers who charted those same constellations, connecting us across the vast expanse of time to a civilization that, in many profound ways, never truly vanished.